Welcome back, my friends. This is part 2 of the Chapter 6 presentation, looking at the development of personality and this kind of social and emotional development of the child. And in this second component, or the second segment, we're going to be looking more at the parenting aspect. Okay, and how different types of the nurture environment of the parenting situation of the child's home, how that plays a role in shaping the development at this stage. All right, welcome back to part 2. Glad to see you. And I'm just going to jump straight into it. Okay, so now we're going to spend some time talking about the parenting styles and the theory of Diana Bumrine and her ideas. So this is from 1971. She was stressing this idea that just the way that we say there's different styles of all kinds of things, different styles of temperament, different personality types, we use that, which is almost like I don't know, we'd have to kind of get into the difference between the word style and type. If you act in a certain style of way, you're a certain type of person. The type is characterized by the style, I guess you could say. And what Bandura is saying is that you could take families and assess them on where they fall as these parenting styles. And she's going to say there's basically 4 kind of general parenting styles, and there's going to be these characteristics that we're going to look at the amount of warm emotion and the amount of specific rules and structure, and that we're going to kind of define these 4 different types. You maybe heard of them, like authoritarian, authoritative, permissive, and then neglectful. And so I'm going to give you kind of the overview of this, okay? But remember, this is like, the idea is that if you observed a family long enough, you'd be able to classify them as one of these styles. All right, and I'm going to use TV examples to kind of take a slightly lighter approach to looking at this. Okay, so my example, the first one, authoritarian. So now the hardest part of this is the language of the first 2. So there's authoritarian and then authoritative, which is almost the same word except the ending. And remember, authoritarian means that's like the defining characteristics. Authoritative, it's like that, the "iv" part, there's this similarity to that, but there's also, well, there's more emotion, and I'm going to get to that in a second. But so authoritarian is when you have this, like, kind of like Red Foreman from that 70s show where the dad's like really strict. He loves his kids, but remember, we're not asking actually if the parent loves the kids. We're not just asking that, we're asking, is there an expression of kind of warm communication and love? Is it expressed? Do you see it? Do you see the expression of love, and do you see the expression of kind of strict rules? So the authoritarian parent is characteristically restrictive, with a more punitive style in which the parent exhorts the child to follow their directions and respect their work and effort. The authoritarian parent places firmer limits and controls on the child and allows for less verbal exchange or pushback. For example, an authoritarian parent may say, you may, or do it my way or else. Authoritarian parents may also punish the child frequently, enforce rules rigidly but not always fully explain them, show anger towards the child. Children of authoritarian parents are often unhappy and fearful and anxious about comparing themselves to others. They also tend to fail to initiate activity, have weaker communication skills. So if you were to sort of simplify in your notes, you'd say, in this style we see a high presence of like rules and structure, and low, they would score low in the amount of expressed warm emotion and love. And remember, my point from before is that's not like saying that Red Foreman didn't love his kids. If you watch that show, it's evident that he does, right? But it's, if you were to track their behaviors through observational analysis, you'd see that, like, well, you sort of see as I start to show comparisons, right? But that Red was like a good dad, but you would still say authoritarian. Now it's the mom, her name's just slipping my head because I'm, but anyways, the mom on that 70s show, who's hilarious, absolutely hilarious, like, her parenting style is a bit different. So sometimes the parenting style of the 2 different parents is different, and sometimes parenting style can be different towards different kids in the same family. Okay, so remember, this is just sort of to give us some language. It's not, there's nothing about this is necessarily simplistic. It's just saying, like, and what I mean is just there's so much variety, obviously, right? But this would be the example, right? Red form, and someone that's like really strict, still loves his kid though, but there's not a lot of like warm expressed emotion. In terms of authoritative, I thought that Uncle Phil was the good example. And, if you watch Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, the parents in that show, like, it's sort of the same thing where there's a lot of rules. He's a relatively strict uh, dad and an adopted dad to Will, right? And there's also a lot of love. So if you're putting this in your notes, you're kind of saying that this is, you have the presence of both. You have the presence of the rules and structures and the presence of the warm emotion. Authoritative parenting encourages children to be independent, but still places limits and controls on their actions. Extensive verbal give and take is allowed. Parents are warm and nurturant towards their child. An authoritative parent might put an arm around their child in a comforting way and say, "You shouldn't have done that. Let's go talk about how you can handle the situation better next time," which is like half the episodes in this, right? Will did something, Uncle Phil saves him, and there's a lesson to be learned. Authoritative parents show pleasure and support in response to their children's constructive behaviors. They also expect independent, age-appropriate behavior. Children whose parents are authoritative are often cheerful and self-controlled, self-reliant, achievement-oriented, tend to maintain friendly relationships with peers, cooperate well with adults, cooperate, and cope well under stress. Even physically, like one study showed that young children with authoritative parents are less likely to develop issues with eating than in terms of obesity, than their counterparts with more authoritative parents. That's a study from 2015. Okay, so both of these first two have that authority aspect at the beginning of the word, right? So there's the rules and the structure. And what's characteristically different of authoritative is that there's more expression of that positive emotionality. So this one was a little bit harder to think of the right example. I know if you watch Married with Children, the Bundy parents have some redeeming qualities for sure, and especially the mom. But I think this would be my example from the media of the neglectful parents. This style of parenting, which is more uninvolved in the child's life. Again, it doesn't mean that the parents don't love the kids. It's that we're seeing less expression of outward positive emotion and communication is the one variable, and then the other variable is the amount of structure and rules. Remember, that's what we keep looking for. So in this scenario, and that's basically what I mean by that is that Bumbrian's model basically has those two axes, right? So it's like, do we see the presence of warm emotional expression and communication, and do we see the presence of kind of rules and structure, right? And authoritative, we saw both. Authoritarian, we saw the structure without as much outward expression of positive emotionality. In this scenario, we see neither, right? We don't see the expression of either. Children whose parents are neglectful tend to develop a sense that other aspects of parents' lives are more important than they are. These children tend to be socially incompetent. Many can develop poor social and self-control and don't handle independence well. They frequently have low self-esteem or immature for their age, may be alienated from the rest of the family. In adolescence, they tend to show patterns, or they may show patterns of truancy and delinquency. Earlier in the presentation, or in the last one, when I talked about the importance of organizations like Big Brothers, like, sort of connects with this in a practical way. So the last comparison I want to make here is to Tony Soprano. And Tony Soprano, in a lot of ways, like, was very outward expressive of love for his kids, and in weird ways, right? Because Tony Soprano's is like one of the most interesting characters, in my opinion, in the history of TV, right? He's the head of the mafia, and he's also having these intense panic attacks that he's seeking counseling for and psychotherapy for. So you're seeing both this tough guy mobster and also his uh, relationship with the therapist, and this whole time he loves his family absolutely, but he's so permissive. They just do whatever they want, right? And the parents are maybe highly involved with the children, but don't put a lot of controls on them or demands on them. And for a long time, this style, like in the old textbook I used to use, and for years, I always called this permissive, right? And what's in brackets there. And now they tend to call it more indulgent, like letting them do whatever they want. And just over there, it's like, it's a stressful concept to talk about because through this pandemic, it's shifted. I don't have any stats to back this up, but I'm just assuming it's shifted a lot more parenting styles in this direction. Out of necessity of having kids at home and having to try to still do work, and so we got to sort of build some of this stuff back up. But this idea of indulgent parenting, a style of parenting where parents are highly involved but place few demands on controls on the child. So there's a lot of the positive expression of emotion and positive emotionality, and communication is the other word I was looking for there. But we're not seeing the rules and structure, right? And this is sort of what's her main point of all this research, is basically like what kids really need is an emotionally supportive environment that has rules that are clear and understandable. And those are associated with authoritative parenting, which is highly associated with the best developmental outcomes. These parents often let the children do what they want. Some parents deliberately rear children in this way because they believe the combination of a warm environment with few restraints will produce a more creative, confident child. However, children whose parents are indulgent rarely learn to respect others and can have difficulty controlling their own behavior. They have a tendency to become more egocentric, non-compliant, and may have unsatisfactory relationships with their peers. Okay, so looking at the experience of the family in childhood, that 2 to 4-year-olds, if they're in the presence of each other, the siblings, like brothers or sisters or whatever, brother and sister, that the likelihood of conflict, or at least friction over whatever, not wanting to play the same game, he pulled my hair, he pushed me, blah blah blah, he took my toy, he drank out of my cup, whatever it is, it's like that tends to happen like every 10 minutes. It's like, but as they start to get older, you start to see a decline in the rate of that. All right, I want to just comment on a few other things, right? That there's also, we're seeing in places like Canada, this larger proportion of families that are a single parent family, right? And how does that affect all of this? Because if I'm talking about these family dynamics, a lot of developmental psychology is sort of the research, at least in in the history of the field, has been focused on the nuclear family. So this look at how these ideas play out in a single parent scenario are very interesting, and for a long time there's been a lot of speculation about it, but now you're starting to see a more actual empirical evidence starting to come. And the role of parental employment, what matters for the children is the nature of the work and the nature of how the work affects their time at home. The children in divorced or step families often show more issues with adjustment and during. So that's actually a huge one, right? So I'll talk about that more later in the course, but how divorce affects kids. But all I'm kind of trying to say with this slide is, like, we're talking about this as if it's just this one kid, but this kid's living in a family. And when you're looking at the kid's social life and the family social life, they're the same thing, but different things. They're different looks through the sort of kaleidoscope. What's that thing called, that no matter what the hologram, whatever side you're looking through, you're seeing a different reflection of the same thing. It's like during middle, and that's a weird comment, I know, but I'm basically trying to make this point of, like, the complexity of the social world isn't just the child's experience, it's also that the child's experiencing this in the presence of other people experiencing it, and everyone's trying to make sense of it, and everyone's has their own complexities. During middle and late childhood, attachment becomes more sophisticated. The social world of the child starts to expand to peers and teachers and others, typically and they start to spend less time with their parents, especially when we're talking about this time of childhood as compared to infancy and when they were a toddler. Okay, another important thing that happens at this stage in life, in this childhood stage, right? And I've been kind of hinting at this and talking about this, but this idea that they're now exposed to this peer group, this expanded, emerging peer group. As children grow older, they're spending an increased amount of time with their peers, right? School. And that's actually really important. It's like the child's. I've been struggling with this whole time, right? It's kids need to be in school. They need to be around other people. They need to be around other kids specifically at that specific time in their development. It's absolutely critical. Good peer relations contribute to normal social emotional development, especially in middle and late childhood. This idea of there's just certain things that kids don't learn when they're not around other kids. They don't learn cooperation. They don't learn intimacy. They don't learn competition, healthy competition. I can't teach that to Evelyn. I can teach Evelyn how to read. I can teach her all kinds of skills. I can have a warm relationship with her, but I can't teach her what it's like to compete with someone else at sort of her level. And I can't teach her how to cooperate at the level of the peer. And I can't teach, there's certain things that kids need to learn from each other. And it's like Piaget's idea of this genetic epistemology, like they're born. And think of what that means is like, it's not that your world's not just this social construction. Your world's actually, your epistemology, your way of understanding the world is genetic. And it's like you're, this is Piaget, but that you're like almost set up to have these experiences. And it's devastating if that's denied. And if like, on that last rant, if I was, and I'm just trying to be more articulate about this, but if we're really saying like why is it so important kids are around other kids? Well, it's important for these 6 specific developmental functions. Number 1, companionship, friendship. It's like that almost doesn't even need an argument, but just because it's so common doesn't deny its developmental importance. And you see in dramatic effect what happens when that's denied. Stimulation. It's like kids. I remember when Evie was doing school from home or whatever, it's like she was so bored. And it's not the teachers did a great job. They did their absolute best, but it's like she missed being around other kids. There's this physical support. They're like literally learning how to explore their world together and how to run together and how to throw the ball and how to build bricks and how to ego support. They're instilling in each other a sense of who they are. Who knows what the effect of denying that is, or denying it, or missing it, or whatever the thing is, right? And just the idea of the central developmental importance, this idea of social comparison, that it gives them a way to kind of make sense of the world and how they fit in. And then the last one, obviously, or not, maybe not obviously, but this idea of that there's the intimacy, the affect, that it's nice to have friends, right? And it's like, it's not just, and I think we've all learned through all this that like part of school, so much of school is the school, like the campus, like being around other people and going for lunch and going for a beer or going for a walk with a friend or whatever it is, right? It's like, we're human beings. We've evolved in situations in group contexts where things have gotten so stamped into who we are that when it's denied, it creates anxiety, it creates unease, or unarticulated unease. Also, I hope I don't lose you with my rants. I'm just trying to not just read slides, right? I'm trying to give you the kind of information and then try to make it interesting, or try to add a piece, or try to contextualize this idea that like the kid's walking at school and turns the corner and there's people there, right? And say like you turn the corner and there's that guy there and he's like, hey, what's up, man? And there's 2 other girls there, and it's like that kid's like instantly processing the situation, right? Because the kid's thinking like, is this guy, maybe it's his friend, maybe it's not his friend, is this guy being nice to me, is this guy making fun of me, are these girls laughing at me, are these girls just laughing because this guy's blah blah blah, like because they want him to think they're cool, or do they not actually like that guy? And so like this is all this like what we could call social processing, social information processing, and this is happening at breakneck speed, right? So this is happening at so fast that it's like hard to put any kind of speed to it. We're talking about like the word would be like split seconds, right? Like it's like your brain is selectively attending to social cues, right? So it's not like the person comes around the corner. So I just want to use this example and why this picture I think works, because I'm not talking about like a kid sitting down and thinking about it and philosophizing about the situation. I'm talking about like what's actually happening in their cognitive system as they turn that corner. And there's this in the brain, explosive is not the right word, this overwhelming sensation, right? Because if you think about your brain's trying to social information process, like a computer, it's trying to process this social situation, this complex situation. This situation is very complex. If there's 3 people, maybe you only know one person a little bit, and so they're almost a bit of a wild card in your analysis. It's like your brain's like speeding to predict the situation and how you should engage it. You're selectively attending to certain social cues, right? So you're not looking at them all equally. First of all, you're looking straight at their eyes and mouth, right? You're trying to it's not, and of course the kids, it's not like they're articulating this. It's like you're doing this all the time in every scenario. It's like, so the most complex thing about you as a human is that you walk around and it feels like it's just like this clear movie, and we underestimate how much our brains constantly integrating and then representing to us a reality. So anyway, so we come around and we're selectively attending to certain social cues, and then we're attributing intent, like this means this. So this person's like being like, yo, hey, what's up, man? It's like because he actually likes me and that's my friend. And oh yeah, we were playing together, soccer together in gym class, and then you go and give the guy a high five or whatever, and it's like you see the cue, you attribute it, but maybe you had an argument with that guy and you both like the same girl, and you come around the corner and then you attribute intent completely differently. You're generating goals. What do you want to do in this situation? Did he say something kind of smart alecky to you, and do you want to say something back so you don't look dumb, or do you want to just get out of this situation? Or then you access memorized behavioral scripts. Piaget would use the word schemas, right? But this, I like that term actually, kind of memorized behavioral scripts. Remember, this is all in fractions of a second. You're not articulating any of this. It's not like you're like, let me selectively attend to social cues and then generate goals and blah, blah, blah. It's like this is all happening immediately. Perception. This is like Merleau-Ponty's one really good point. That sounded critical. He has other good points, but this idea of, he wrote a book called The Primacy of Perception, right? That like perception, it's not like we have sensation and then we have this long philosophizing process and then we have our perception of things. It's like there's a primacy to perception. It's right at the front, or it's right with it at the sensation at the front. And we access these memorized behavioral scripts, and then we make decisions, and then we do our response. Right, so we attend to the cues, we try to understand what the cues mean, we try to generate how we want to respond in response to that. We then access scripts of how to do it, right? If you're an actor, this is how you do it. Do this script, say this, do this. We then make the decision to do it, and we act and we do a behavior, right? So that's like trying to say, if you were trying to teach an AI robot how to process a situation like a human, you'd have to teach them to do these 6 things. And it's like just an interesting way of breaking down this idea that like what's going on in the brain when the child's trying to process a complex social situation. I hope I explained that decently well. I'm noticing this slide's 5 minutes and I was ranting, but I'm trying to explain the complexity of this. And I think that there's so many interesting complexities, similarities, and just interesting connections between looking at how a child's mind develops and things like artificial intelligence and the struggles they're having trying to do things like this. because there's so much going on in a social situation. There's so much visual information. It's so heavily contextualized. What it means is very situationally based and dependent on relationships. Some person you don't like being like, hey, oh, you again. Or someone you really like being like, yeah, you're here. It's like almost the same thing. And it's just like, and we're expert at reading that. And it happens so fast that it's hard to kind of break down what's actually happening. Social information processing, right? So this would fit under the cognitive psychological approaches. Okay, so I would say, well, it's not just I would say, developmental psychology teaches that there's 3 fundamental functions of play, and by far the most important is that it helps the child control their anxiety. The number one thing to know about any kind of philosophical argument for why it's important that kids play with other kids and engage in activities and go outside and make a fort and, you know, go and run and find frogs in the creek and learn how to ride a bike and chase dragons with sticks that you're pretending are swords. It helps them control their anxiety, because it helps this release of built up tension. It helps them learn to cope with problems, learn that what they do affects how they feel. There's all these like kind of hidden benefits. And then this last one too, it's like, what do you mean that's fake when they're playing and they're chasing dragons and pretending that they're knights trying to save the princess? It's like, if you had some worry about some hypothetical situation that might never happen, I wouldn't say that your worries are fake. It's like imaginative conceptualization of visual stimulus that is like a experience that we have cognitively is not fake. Obviously there's not really dragons. They're creating almost like an immersive in the moment VR augmented reality that they know is not real and yet are acting as if it's real because it's fun. It's like, don't underestimate the magical complexity of that. It's actually it's a sign of advanced intelligence. Play absolutely is. It's activity for the intrinsic enjoyment of that activity. It's almost definitionally not goal oriented. It's not associated with reproduction or getting food or that's why when you see animals that are engaging in play, you see it as a sign of intelligence. Alright, so all that kind of talk about the imaginative aspect, and it's like imaginative creative play is so important. Kids playing this, like they're literally playing out roles. They're learning their world. It's like the mind, it's not like, the mind is set up to have this I've resisted in this course a bunch of times using the word dreamlike because it's almost too loaded. This imaginative component where it's like, I don't know, it's a loss. It's a real loss that we don't have more of that as adults. It's like, it's really fun to get lost in a game, especially with like when I'm playing with my daughter and her games are like very innocent and fun, and it's important. If I made the point, I've been like rambling for a bit. I'll switch to the next slide. So yeah, I got rambly there a little bit about like just kind of philosophical deep dive into games and play, and just I wanted to kind of follow up with a little more concrete, some definitions of types of play, right? So right now my baby Charlotte, if you lie her on her baby mat that has like these two kind of like poles or whatever that cross, and then there's like little toys that hang. You've seen them, and like just like a basic thing you'd see a baby laying on and playing with like the different little stuffed animals or whatever that are hanging down. It's like you'd call that sensory motor play, and it's play that is, she's, again, this is kind of going back several chapters when we were talking about sensory motor experience and Piaget's idea that that first stage, the child's engagement with their world, is almost entirely through their senses and their movement. So sensory motor play, it's like Charlotte's like learning her world through learning that she can move her hand and touch something and make that thing move. It's like, think of that as like the beginning of eye-hand coordination. And then there's like practice play of the repetition that's involved in learning new skills, and that the kids like that there's a funness associated with that, right? And whether we're calling that like the sensory motor, we're talking about how like there's also this push Erickson talked about earlier in this presentation, this the first part, this push towards initiative in industry, and this idea that there's an internal intrinsic reward associated with getting better at things. Symbolic play. And this is sort of like what I was just talking about, like playing in games where there's a pretense. The pretense is that there's dragons, and the trees are the dragons, and these little sticks that we have are the swords, and you have to sneak around the bush and blah blah blah. It's like those are the type of like fun made up games I play with my daughter in the backyard. It's like it's super fun, and she runs around for a bunch of time, and then she eats her supper better and sleeps better. It's like helps them process anxiety. Social play, also like this idea of interacting, and there's that aspect of it, constructive play, or this idea of like how symbol recognition of like this representing this, like this stick representing a sword, that's actually a representation of a kind of fairly complex cognitive operation, right? Like it's not nothing that a child can abstractly play and say like this doll, like my daughter, I'll always remember this. It's like the one day she was at her cousin's and they watched PJ Masks, and in PJ Masks there's 3 characters, one's blue, one's green, and one's red in their like uniform colors or whatever. And Evie later that day was like playing, and I was like in the other room, and I came in and she was playing with like a red and a green and a blue marker, and they were all the different people. And it was like, I was just, and she was really young, I can't remember her exact age, but I just remember thinking like, for a little kid, that's so like at a very basic level, that's so creative, and so not necessarily even creative, but the ability to take this idea and move it to this, right? Like I'm representing this idea, or the second bottom one, symbolic representation. These markers are, you know, owl and cat boy and gecko. See, I watch way too much kids shows. And then games, or being actively engaged in play that's more rule based, like say for example sports. So yeah, I suggest at this point, but I want to go a little bit further on it, that play is suggestive of intelligence, and animals that play more, we view them as more, as smarter, and young mammals of a lot of different species play, right? It's a very mammal thing, and it's so, I think talking about it as something that's common amongst mammals also is a way of underscoring the biological and evolutionary importance of it, that it's like it's not optional, it's something that's so core to, we're not just cognitive beings, we're not just emotional beings, we're also embodied. This idea that free play is on the decline, that kids are more likely to be in more organized sports or very directed, kind of focused interaction, and not to mention like screen time and everything with the current situation. So, and again, it's like hard to be blaming parents a lot for screen time when a lot of other options are limited. Alrighty. Quick review. I hope you enjoyed that presentation. This second half of the video is a lot shorter, but I'm going to wrap up now and kind of do the quick point reviews for the students about to do the test. All right. Okay, so in this last piece, I'm going to do a quiz review, and this is going to be a review of this entire chapter, right? So this whole chapter 6. So it's going to start with points from the first video and then wrap up with this last section. In Erikson's theory, early childhood is a period when development involves resolving this conflict around initiative versus guilt. Remember, if you've been taking notes during these videos, you already have these points. It's just sort of this condensed review. Middle childhood is a period when development involves resolving the conflict of industry versus inferiority also, and that parents can play a central role in helping children resolve these conflicts. Children's understanding of self changes throughout childhood. Self-concept refers to domain specifics. That means like, domain specific is like the opposite of saying general. So it means like in this area, my confidence in like math, or my how I view myself as an athlete, or if I think I'm good looking, or if I think I'm smart. That's domain specific, area specific evaluations of self. Self-esteem refers to global, so the opposite then, like more general, global evaluations of self, and is referred to as sometimes as self-worth or self-image. Self-efficacy and self-regulation are linked to children's competence and achievement. Careful thought is needed to promote healthy self-esteem. Children's understanding of others becomes more adult-like as they develop perspective taking. Gender refers to the social and psychological dimensions of being male or female. Both psychoanalytic theory and social cognitive theory emphasize the adoption of parents' gender characteristics. Peers are especially adept at rewarding gender-appropriate behavior. Number 5, young children's range of emotions expand during early childhood as they increasingly experience self-conscious emotions such as pride, shame, and guilt. Children benefit from having emotion coaching parents. As children get older, they use a greater variety of coping strategies and more cognitive strategies to regulate their emotions. They also show increased emotional understanding. Number 6, moral development involves thoughts, feelings, and actions regarding the rules and regulations about what people should do in their interactions with others. Piaget proposed cognitive changes in children's moral reasoning. Behavioral and social cognitive theorists argue that there's considerable situational variability in moral behavior. Right, so people act, remember every time you see the word moral to think that that's talking about good or bad, or right or wrong, I mean. And so people act or view things as right or wrong, sometimes situationally. Perspective taking and social relationships both influence moral reasoning. So like deciding what's right or wrong. The ability for them to take perspective, and the fact that the quality and the type of their social relationships affect how they make sense of things and how they determine right or wrong. Authoritarian, authoritative, neglectful, and indulgent parenting styles produce different results. Authoritative parenting style, so when you see both the warm expression of emotion and communication combined with the presence of rules and structure. Authoritative parenting is the style most often associated with a child's social competence, so it's the style associated with the child doing the best from a developmental perspective. Number 9, there's little evidence that physical punishment is beneficial, and it can lead to child maltreatment in the form of things like physical abuse, neglect, and sexual abuse, and emotional abuse. And we didn't touch on that a ton in this presentation, but we will at a later point. Siblings interact with each other in positive and negative ways. Parents can help their children to navigate conflict. Friends, thanks for watching another episode or whatever, and next week I'll be making, or not next week, maybe later this weekend or on the weekend, My goal is to by next Monday night. I know I'm like a little bit behind because originally I was doing it Fridays, but by the end of the week or weekend, I'll be coming out with the next one, sort of the last presentation that you have a quiz associated with, the chapter 7 presentation on the nature of adolescence. So that's coming soon, and I was so impressed with the Genesis of Psychology assignments. Excellent work. Can't wait to see your philosophies of mind assignments. And thanks for being such an awesome class. Reach out if you need anything. And, what do I say sometimes? Be good people. Take care of your loved ones. Trust yourself. Think your own thoughts. Keep your stick on the ice. Cheers.